Hello everyone, bonjour à tous. Uh, I continue the second part of what the Ponty says on his lecture on the perception of the world and perception of science. Very sensitive. And at the wrapping of the end of the year, for more than decades of this investigation on phenomenology and existentialism, the society of the philosopher of the existentialism and perception might be make a contention and make an argument and will be get the other side of the my conversation and the my debate right now as a finalize of this year, which I critic sensually and seriously and by reasons to the what the Merleau-Ponty says on a separation and on a distinction between the science and the perception. He believes that based on the Descartesism and based on the Cartesian and based on the dualism, based on the wax and based on the relativity of the Einstein, the law of the classical physics cannot be get inside of the itself of the mind and perception. There is something in our perception which get our mind to inside to look in other panel to the outside, and a little bit he make a contention of the weakness and illusionary of the science in their attitude of scientism based on a calculation and engineering, and that has a something to be object in his subject, because after 77 years by improvement and progress in the biology, there is something to be negated and to be refuted in his claim. He first of all, very important right now, before I want to emphasize, I read his exactly lecture on this topic of the world of the science and world of the perception. I read, but before I want to briefly want to give a map to our listeners and to the society of the philosophy and the philosophy of and the society of the science. What he tried to say. He in a first side said, first of all, there is some deception in our senses, like a mirage, and after we cannot trust too much, we have to just trust on our intellect, but perception is the only of beginning, still confused, still a beginning, and the confused science of appearance to the reality. So perception not let us to be confused as by means of the science from the appearance to the reality, and the modern art and the thought through the rehabilitated the perception and the perceived world help us at this track. And he said, I don't want to imply that they deny the value of the science, but what verification is. Formula of law of physics to remain in its opacity. Position of observer. Right now he goes to the relativity of Einstein in his time in 1948. The position of observers inseparable from the situation is makes us the human not to be absolute. So make a panel for religion to receive the God as an absolute observer, as a weakness of the physics. The dogmatism of the science he talking, and after he says that he takes itself as an absolute, but philosophy of science is different and open to the perceived door. So philosophy and painting, poetry is making turn us to the other vision to see the objects, space, animals, and even the human to the outside. And these appear to our perception fields. So right now he want to emphasize of the philosophy of perception is something is a more higher hierarchy than the science by means of the only science, because science has its weakness. There is something is here. I I'm right now reading, and after by reason I refute and reject this way of the phenomenology of perception in a philosophy of existentialism, because the prosteriori is emphasized and stressed on a monoism, and the monoism based on our physiology and metabolism of our physiology of the neurons. Therefore, our mind and way of thinking is a kingdom, an absolute observer, just because only and merely we are in 2026 and still we don't know, and we have a just history just for 5 centuries, because science started from 15th century and 16th century so far, and the giant progress is happened for last century, and next century and after next century it will be very clear what's going on for some illusionary or our strength of the mind is overwhelmingly is overlap all the weaknesses of our senses, 5 senses, and we can understand, and that's the only is by artificial intelligence and quantum, by means of that to realize the modeling of our mind and our neuron physiology. Even, for example, I say I'm reading one page of the concept, how many calories the mind is making production of electromagnet for this reading of the one page, or our problem, the one engineering the problem, how many calories I use, and that is a modeling of. And to reach this modeling, still we need the time and maybe centuries. But now right now I get back to the what the exactly the in a congress and the seminar or any virtual conversational philosophy, we do not have a right talk about the one philosopher without reading his context and after object and critique on that, because it's making something false claim. So right now I'm reading exactly what he said. Continue on the word of perception. Ponty cited Descartes even said that simply by examining sensory objects without reference to the result of a research, I am able to discover the deception of my senses and learn to only trust my intellect. For example, I claim to see a piece of wax, but what is the wax? It certainly is not its white color, nor its flowery scent that it may have retained, nor its flowery scent that it may have retained, nor its softness to touch or the sound it makes when dropped. None of these constitutive of wax, since it may lose all these qualities without living to exist. But what is the wax? It certainly is not its white color, nor its flowery scent that it may have retained, nor its flowery scent that it may have retained, nor its softness to touch or the sound it makes when dropped. None of these is constitutive of the wax, since it may lose all of these qualities without living to exist. For example, if I melt it and it changes into the colorless liquid without a noticeable scent and no longer receives my touch, yet I claim it's still the same wax. How should this be understood? What remains despite the change is only a piece of the matter without qualities, or most a capacity to occupy a space and take on a different forms, without the occupied space or received from being determined at all. This is a real permanent essence of the wax. This is clear that the reality of the wax is not revealed to my senses alone, for they only present me with objects of definite size and shape. The true wax, the Descartes says, cannot be seen by eyes, but only conceived by the intellect. When I think I see the wax with my eyes, I just think through the sensory qualities to the bare wax with the qualities which is their common source. Thus, for Descartes, and these ideas has a long held sway in the French philosophical tradition, perception is only the beginning of the still confused science. The relation of perception to science is that of appearance to reality. Our dignity is that we entrust ourselves to the intellect, which alone can discover the truth of the world. When I said before that the modern art and thought rehabilitated perception and the perceived world, I obviously did not mean to imply that they deny the value of science, either as an instrument of technological development or as a lesson to imprecision truths. Science has been and remains the domain where one must learn what verification is, what meticulous research is, what is the critical of oneself and one prejudice. It was good that all was expected of it at a time when it still did not exist. But the question modern thought raises regarding it is not intended to contest its existence or a close off any area of inquiry. It is a question of whether science provides or ever will provide a representation of the world. I repeat that. This is the most contentious. I repeat. But the question modern thought raises regarding it, it is not intended to contest its existence or to close off any area of inquiry. It is a question of whether science provides or ever will provide a representation of the world, which is complete, self-sufficient, and somehow closed in upon itself, so that there no longer are any meaningful questions beyond it. It isn't about denying or limiting science, but knowing if it has the right to deny or exclude as illusory. All inquiry which does not proceed by measurement and comparisons and end up with laws like those of classical physics, not only those that question show no hostility to science, but science itself in its most recent developments forces to ask this and encourage us to answer it negatively. Since the end of the 19th century, scientists have been used to considering their laws and theories no longer as an exact image of what happens in nature, but as a schema ever simpler than the natural events, destined to be corrected by more precise investigation in a world. As the approximate knowledge, the data which experience provides are subjected by science to an analysis that we cannot ever hope to be completed. Since there are no limits to observation, we can always imagine it being more complete or exact than it is at any given time. The task of science is an endless elucidation of concrete, the sensory, and it follows that it no longer can be considered in the classical way as a mere appearance destined to be overcome by scientific understanding. The data of perception and generally the historical events of the world cannot be deduced from a number of laws which would compose the permanent face of the universe. On the contrary, the laws is an approximate expression of the physical events and which allows it to retain its opacity. The scientist today no longer has, as in classical period, the illusion of accessing the core of things, the object in itself. On this point, the physics of relativity confirms that absolute and final objectivity is but a dream. It shows that each observation is strictly linked to the position of observer, inseparable from given situation, and it rejects the notion of an absolute observer. We cannot flatter ourselves in a science to attain by the exercise of the pure and unsituated intellect an object free of any human trace as a God would see it. This does not make the need for scientific research any less pressing. It only fights the dogmatism of science that takes itself for absolute and total knowledge. We are just doing justice to all elements of the human experience, particularly to our sensory perception, while science and the philosophy of science open the door to an exploration of the perceived world. Painting, poetry, and philosophy have resolutely entered that domain which is acknowledged to them and gave us a new vision characteristic of our time, of object, space, animals, even human, seen from the outside as they appear in our perceptual field. End of the quote and end of his lecture. So now, monoism and philosophy of the prosteriori, based after 77 years and based on what the MRI did so far and based on the last artificial intelligence on the biology, answer and reject and critique to this claim as follows. And this is what I wrote in his answering. Mauro Ponty, in the last chapter of his lecture, by bringing example of wax in Cartesianism, is to deduct that our limited sensory and modification wax in different substance in unstable environment, and also at last physical achievement in relativity, are to make a skeptic on our situated observer to the phenomena in different space and time to conclude the uncertainty method of science, and recounting to the philosophy of metaphysics and aesthetic art in painting and poetry to reach outside of the perception in an object, space, animal, and even human. While his subject title in philosophy at perception and science is right topic in foreign philosophy, then culture, history, society, art, and metaphysics as a value, but his argument is not valid sound to be as a virtue. The reasons of this contention are as follows. First of all, he did not set time to study science that not limited to the physics, but chemistry and biology are a main part of the entities which describe our perception in routine daily life. Ever since our thought is like working with our computer are based on our software, which is function magnetic waves, and our hardware is our nerves system, which is accessory like our brain's lobes with its entities from DNA, RNA in genome and other metabolism organelles to make as such harmony for a production concept and calculation measurement engineering at our mind. Secondly, according to Eleatic methodology, what is the wax? What we know so far, which he does not mention at brief of AI, is over 300 compounds of the chemical primary long chains esters from long chain fatty acids like a triaconinyl platinate acid combines by fatty acid and alcohol with chemical formulation of C15 H31 COOC30 H61. Excuse me. As a one nature paradox, as on a nature of paradox elucidated that essence bonds are based on positive and negative of the particles atoms in electron and proton, which in turn has a genesis of quarks as all objects and body or even our nerves to have a function of perception. Third, another reason to refute his proposition is concerning that science is based on unlimited development and progress at its trends, hereby for having first self-replication of RNA in such a stable temperature and pressure of thermodynamic 4 billion years ago, and if human pregnancy is just 9 months, has this previous evolution history, as I mentioned in some of my previous books, is like a physician at appointment of the patient to write a prescription at 1 minute, but studied 7 years at university to reach at this criteria of recognition. If wax is soluble and losing its color and form would be a proof of materialism and certainty of the science, since all things are created at condition thermodynamic in a specific temperature and pressure, then human in different temperature is the other substance, as a 70 kilogram of our corpse in cremation has a 2.4 to 3.6 kilogram or 3 to 3.5 liter ash in volume, which is merely our bones and skeleton, because our muscle and fats are fleshy part and will be vapor in atmosphere. Thus, part of law at thermodynamic that energy does not disappear but modify from one form to other one. No investing has a more virtue than green environmental protection. I'm going to the appendix and as a footnotes for this part, because I talk about the cremation. No investment has a more virtue than green environmental protection, as Germany has premium recycling and waste management, then South Korea of the wasteful recycling to compost, and finally Sweden in energy conservation, while Iran with North America profession at landfills and sometimes by forensic. End of the footnote. Other reason would be for ponty perception is only the beginning of still confused science, and the relation of perception to science is that of appearance to the reality, while prosteriori has a reductionist at the monism when speculate in future of development of physiology of neurons is not only to indicate the genes map of perception function, but to reach the algorithms and modeling of the magnetic waves for the concept and calculation engineering and its progress. Calculate how much calories brain needed to students and mathematical class compared to the manipulate labor at factory or play sports. What is abstract or concrete is nothingness except our interpretation to reach new cycle of magnetic wave in its nature as a conclusion comprehension, while yet are on a monoism, since neurology at perception is like a film matter at the camera to record the transferring wave quantum energy, or in other extension relation hard disks to software, while our entities are yet are atoms. Henceforth, for this philosophy prosteriori at the second quarter of 21st century itself is alike concrete and abstract, merely an attribute to the new wave cycle function at its conceived, and at philosophy of law a new panel for our judgment, how to provide law vocabularies as expected. A judge restate that I perceive, not I believe or face it, since does not have a deduction, perception, reasoning at the respect to our function of physiology of neurons. Therefore, whence lipid chain of the front lobe rotates to the forward and then backward based on a positive and negative particles of the atoms, indeed its interpretation is itself to the or at Kantian categorical imperative in its cognitive representation. Now our new generation with artificial intelligent cell phone to isolate itself figment, apparition, phantasm, illusory, soul and spirit, ghost and phantom at the historical storage of our tradition. Other reason why we can think at primary school one apple, or adds the sign of our school and the hospitals in Quebec. Other apple is 2, or 1 minus 2 is equal minus 1 at polynomial diagram, because the genesis are particles are quarks and they have a different or opposite charge. Henceforth, Encyclopedia of History of Science at the moment adds on it in the future would be at the pivotal core of philosophy to analyze all aspects of the perception at mind, and to extend at other subjects of philosophy like a metaphysics, art, culture, society, logic, or etc., as to make a new vision at panels. Other reason, theory relativity of physics on various space and time has a different judgment for observer, indicates another reduction uncertainty of our mind, that different condition in thermodynamics has an overwhelmingly effect in all particles, even at extension attribute time, since if at the billion light years, if there is existence, may works on another rule than quarks does on a solar system. On a sentiment and serenity of music and painting or poetry at mind would be repeatedly on a harmony of the magnetic wave to resonate some metaphors at the different hyperbolic shapes of wave cycles at calls aesthetic arts. This is my reasons for monoism and prosteriori to answer the lecture, and skeptical on dualism for ponty in perception of the world. So judgment is based on a philosophy and association of the existentialism and perception, so let's the time to have such a disjudgment. Thank you very much. Have a great year in 2026, and hopefully all the young generation to make a connection by the YouTubes and documentary in the National Geography or in geology, to continue studying of the biology, nature, and the physics and chemistry, and to bring in the life by the nature. Have a great year. Thank you very much. Bye for now.